What's going on, guys? This is Brandon Dzwonkowski. We're back again with another Gold Standard podcast. We are joined by my colleagues Kate, Brianna, and our special guest, Patrick Faga.
Well, welcome, Patrick.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me here. It's great to be on the podcast.
Yeah, and just to give some background, Patrick is the co-founder of Firstwork. And from what we've done and discussed, Firstwork is a DDT app to assist clinicians when running discrete trials.
That's right. It is a DTT application that has pretty much digitized the entire process of delivering those DTT lessons from setup all the way to reinforcement, which is really where the app is super differentiated. But as we all know, typically people are using flashcards to deliver their DTT lessons, and that has a whole host of inefficiencies from having to actually create all those cards and source the images and laminate them and then replace them when they're inevitably damaged, to just not always having access to everything that you might need for a given session. And of course, when you're using physical flashcards, you're limited by what you can set up, kind of in front of you. And so the nice thing with the application is that you can customize things on a level that is really quite difficult to do with physical cards, especially when it comes to changing the field and, kind of providing that next trial really quickly. So that's really what we're focused on from the DTT perspective, as well as our reinforcement component to the application, which is focused on keeping kids engaged in the learning experience by leveraging rewards that they really care about. And the way that we do that is by giving kids access to fun applications which they already enjoy, like YouTube or Roblox or whatever your special interest might be, after you complete lessons. So inside of Firstwork, when you are doing your lessons, you can't access all of these digital distractors like YouTube, which is one of the big difficulties with moving to that digital realm where, we have some really great opportunities, but of course also some really big distractions. So our application can help minimize some of those distractions and then reposition them as rewards, which you can access after we've worked through some of those learning lessons. So in a nutshell, that's what we do at Firstwork.
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight one of the points that you had said. So Brianna, myself, and Brandon have all used the app already to kind of test it out and see what the applications look like, as well as the contingencies for those reinforcement periods. And one thing that I did really enjoy when using the app was that when they are working, like you had said, it kind of locks them out of all of those other applications that sometimes they may deviate from and begin to play with. So could you dive into a little bit more of what happens when you reach criteria and how it unlocks, and then they're able to use their iPad as they typically would in a reinforcement period?
Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody is familiar with a typical parental control application, we're using functionality that's very similar to that. So on a standard device, you can limit access, for instance, between like 1 and 2 o'clock. The way that our system works, though, is that instead of being based on something like time, we're more functional based. So when you're supposed to be doing those learning lessons, all those fun applications are limited, as you mentioned. And then once you reach that criteria and you've answered all those questions, then everything really just goes back to normal for a period of time that you designate. So you can really have a lot of control over how much time you're going to be able to access those fun applications. And the really cool thing from the learner's perspective is that we get to give a little bit more autonomy in terms of what reinforcers they're going to access. One of the difficulties with delivering rewards is that there's a bit of a balance between what you're, kind of willing to provide and have access to. And sometimes that doesn't always match up with exactly what the learner wants to do at that very moment, which can be really dynamic. So cool thing with the application is that we can count access to all of those applications pretty much together. So, you can spend 2 minutes on YouTube, 2 minutes on Roblox, and then once your time is up, that'll all be added up, and then all those applications will become limited. So essentially, we're switching between a restricted state where all of the fun stuff is sort of not available, so that those, while they are distractions, they are not available. But then as a reward, you can access really anything on your device. So it's a really nice setup so that you can give kids access to the things that they want, and they can sort of select between a wide range of options of really anything that's on the device for how they want to cash in that reward time.
I think that's cool because I feel like that's something I do for myself. I put screen time locks on for me. So it's like after a certain time, locks me out of my apps. So the fact that, we're teaching kids that self-management piece early, because I know that's always everyone's biggest argument. I'm sure you'll touch on this too, is where a lot of the kids that we work with, or just kids in general now, have so much unlimited access to technology. So from a self-management standpoint,
there is no self-management right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And self-management and being able to provide tools that can help create better habits earlier, I think will be a really important thing for a lot of kids. There's a common saying, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. And I think that when it comes to the digital world, that applies really well. If you start off your life with, habits of, having really unlimited access and you're spending, upwards of 8-10 hours a day sometimes on devices, that's going to be something that's going to be hard for you to transition out of once you get a little bit older, because those expectations have already been set that, this is something that we have access to all the time. It's all fun and there's no kind of limits on it. So being able to introduce screen time with a little bit more of a reasonable setup, determined by adults who know what's important for you, can really kind of help set up a situation where the expectations are a little bit more directed towards what would be a healthy relationship with screen time later in life. We've, as adults, I'm sure, have all experienced that even for people who, kind of know that screen time is not necessarily the best thing for you, it's really hard to limit yourself and, kind of have a healthy relationship with screen time. And I think that given that all of us grew up in an era where tablet time was not, common, and it's still an issue for adults, I think it's something that's going to be an increasing issue for the younger generations where they've been building these habits and relationships with devices for such a long time. So once you become an adult, if you've been doing this forever, it's going to be an even bigger ask to, figure out a better way to situate all of this inside of your life.
And I think a great transition to that too is it's not just a self-management tool, but it's also to show progress. So I was kind of playing around with the data piece to it and being able to email yourself or email whoever the progress piece, which then it goes to a full Excel sheet and it can actually break down into the different sections where your progress lies, which ones you got wrong, what you have to work on. How did you guys kind of develop that method of it? So it wasn't just we're going to minimize screen time, but we're also going to start tracking these skills.
Yeah, it's a great question. Something that I noticed when I was working in ABA was that while all parents really want to continue the great learning work that's happening in sessions, because there's a really big disparity between what the professionals know and what parents typically know, it's really difficult for parents to follow through on some of this. There's, often a big gap between, sort of what the best case scenario is and what parents have time for and expertise for right now. So the nice thing with the application, something that we wanted to do with it was create something that could kind of put some of the really nice things about ABA into a bottle so that you can kind of take it and uncork that at home. And you don't necessarily need, to have a professional in the house to be working on goals that are tracked. Because, of course, one of the other difficulties with parent collaboration and ongoing learning is that if you don't know exactly what happened, it's hard to incorporate that into your understanding of the child. And so often you might end up working on the same goals and not being as efficient as is possible, because if there isn't data to say that we've, mastered this target at home, then, it still makes a lot of sense for you to continue working on that until you have demonstration that it has been mastered. So one of the really nice things with giving parents access to data that they can then share with their team is that it allows for that work to kind of count in a way that it might not have before, because you have it right there in the same format that you're traditionally taking data when you're working on these kinds of targets in session. So it fits really nicely into the existing data flows and allows you to kind of give credit to that work in a way that's pretty difficult unless parents are both delivering ongoing learning lessons and tracking them with high fidelity, which is something that is typically quite difficult to achieve.
But it's also kind of easy too, because as Kate and Brianna could attest a little bit more than me, bringing a well-developed plan to a parent, you're not always going to get, I can continue that at home. I can knock this out. More times than not, you're going to kind of get met with, I have to make dinner, I have to do all this, versus where you can pull out Firstwork and it's user-friendly. It's very simple. The directions are as the same that they would be used in school.
Autonomous. You know what I mean? It takes away the parent response effort.
Yeah.
It's just kind of setting it up and then it runs itself.
Yeah. And it kind of still collaborates that parent into the mix where, now you're running it at home and at school. So it's a full teamwork versus, I didn't really have time to run that program, or, I didn't get around to it. Yeah. Now it's as simple as all right, here, you're set up.
Yeah, totally. And one thing that's nice about it as well is that, screen time is sort of typically a spoken for period of time in most homes. There's, kind of routine surrounding that where, a lot of the time you mentioned dinner, maybe that hour before dinner is a time where, parents need a little bit of time and space to, prepare dinner. And so tablet time is often what kids are doing during that period of time. So it's something where you kind of already have a schedule for when you could introduce Firstwork. Essentially, all you have to do is turn it on during those periods of time. So not much else really needs to change in terms of what you need to do to start reintroducing this, it can kind of fit nicely into an existing schedule, which makes it easier for people to pick up. And, as you mentioned before, because it's quite easy to use, it doesn't, you don't need a PhD, you don't need to be a BCBA yourself to really understand what you should be working on, especially if you have access to a care team that can help you with establishing goals and kind of keeping up with the progress and understanding when we should be moving to new targets.
From a BCBA standpoint and an educator standpoint, I think I want to backpedal a little bit to the fact that the app will graph the learner's progress or regression for you, and then it removes the need to make materials. So there is no more cutting, there's no more laminating, a million PEX cards.
Although
it's
laminating
just,
is a little satisfying.
I mean, maybe if you have an abundance of
That
time
fresh
for
cut.
it. But for those who are like putting out fires and then obviously have higher level needs, to check one more thing off your list and say, hey, the app's going to do it for you. I think that's really important to discuss.
Yeah.
And I think you have some data too that highlights the amount of hours that time is
I
saved.
do.
Right?
I was just about to say we have a little bit of data to this. So I did a little bit of research into this because I've been hearing from so many people about how they're spending all this time on laminating cards and printing them and getting them all prepared. And being kind of a data interested person, was curious, like, what is the scope of this? What are we really talking about here? And there is a lot of variation, but we did a poll recently, and we got a really sizable number of responses. And it looks like, on average, folks are spending about 2.5 hours every week, creating these cards, if you're working with a population where that's relevant. And that's a lot of time. That's 1 out of 20 work days. So, it'd be like if you spent an entire day every month just laminating and printing flashcards. And if you look at it from an industry-wide level, it gets pretty striking where it looks like BCBAs are spending about 8 million hours every year creating flashcards. And that's, just an unfathomable amount of time when you scale it up to that level. And just think about what those 8 million hours could do for, the autism community, or even just for the well-being of the BCBA community, which is, of course, as we know, a community that deals with a lot of burnout. It's a very difficult job. So just getting a couple of those hours back every week, especially because often these are not hours that are kind of in your traditional 40-hour work week. A lot of the time this is, 7 o'clock on a Wednesday because you have to get that ready for your next session. So just from a well-being perspective or from a better use time perspective, it is something where we're really talking about almost a 20th of the time that people are spending in the industry. So it's a pretty striking amount of time when you look at it that way. And it's something that it's really easy to kind of look past because it's the way that things have been done for so long, and it's also a labor of love kind of part of the work where professionals are really passionate about making that impact. And so if this is something that is part of that, they're going to do it and not complain about it too much, because it's just a field where people really care about the work they're doing. But despite the fact that people are willing to do it, I don't think that means that they really should be. There's other opportunities,
Especially from like an insurance perspective or a funding perspective. Most insurance companies aren't paying you to make flashcards.
No. Yeah.
So like you said, it's at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday when your typical work week is done, the billable hours are done, or maybe you're trying to get some stuff set up, maybe like during a parent training session, you're like, hey, like let's try these flashcards, and then before you know it, they're lost.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
now,
Or ripped in half.
Yes.
Crumbled.
Spit on.
yeah. So I think it saves time that way, because like not only are you doing it once, you might be doing it multiple times,
Yeah.
because now your nice program that's in that treatment plan, you can't run it if you don't have those materials.
Sure. Yeah, you can't run it. You also can't share it with anybody. That's one of the things that's really cool about our application, is that you can create those programs and then just like copy the code for it, send it to a parent, send it to somebody on your team, and they'll have that exact program that you created, which was another thing that I thought was a bit of a friction point with the flashcards, where you're never going to have thousands of flashcards. Like, we have thousands and thousands of images inside of our app. Nobody's binder is full of that many images. And if you wanted to share a program with an RBT, for instance, you could describe, what the cards are going to be, but it's very difficult to have, that pure transfer of what you planned to what's happening. There's a bit of a telephone game there, and every step of the telephone game, as we all know, the thing that we said gets a little bit further from what we were hoping to be heard. So I think one of the nice things with moving to digital is that it then becomes a lot easier to collaborate and kind of have that high fidelity understanding of what's happening, as opposed to a little bit more of an inference-based setup where what was assigned and what materials they had access to, but it's very difficult to know exactly what happened. But inside of the app, it's this the way that it was programmed, so always happens the same way, and you can really know what's happening on the other side.
From a district standpoint and talking about collaboration, how does that work? So I know one of the districts I currently work in, they have the VB map and all of their cards, right, to conduct that assessment. And that is like gold. You know what I mean? And they share one of them. So if somebody takes it, another person gets annoyed because something is missing or not put back the right way. If a district buys this application, how shareable is it across programs and staff members, essentially?
Super shareable. It's set up so that it's really easy to use both as an individual or as a team. So everything in the application is really set up so it's easy to share the results of those programs. Everybody has access to all the same targets. And then if you wanted to share a specific custom program that you had created, you can just share that with the team members. So compared to your single VB map sort of setup, you have just so many more options, and everybody can have it at the same time. And something that's been really cool that we've heard is while we're not focused on specific assessments or curricula, we do have a massive industry-leading set of targets. So you can really work within almost any existing curriculum set with Firstwork by just selecting the targets that are relevant to you. So despite the fact that we're not really oriented towards VB-Map specifically or any of the other kind of common curricula, you can probe everything typically that you would traditionally do in most any other curriculum set. So because we have that really wide range of customization options as well as a huge set of targets, you can pretty much do anything that you would do with a traditional set.
Now, would each learner have their own username and password, or would a school district have a username and password and then have different, folders with each learner in it with different programs? How does that work?
So traditionally, if you're using it as an organization, you would have a account for the professionals, and then they could have as many sub-accounts essentially inside of that for their learners. We call them student profiles. So say you were an RBT and you visited 5 learners, you might have 5 student profiles, one for each of those learners. And then inside of student profiles, you can save custom programs, you can save settings, and then you can differentiate between the progress that people are making. So you have that separate data set so that you know what's happening with one learner versus another, and then you don't need to redo setup work a lot because once you pick settings that are appropriate, those are all saved in there and you can update them as needed, but you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time, which is really one of the things that we're most excited about the app, where feels like a lot of the time there is that reinvention of the wheel where, everybody's done this, you've done this 100 times, but yet it feels like it's happening almost for the first time. But the nice thing with the app is that, it's all kind of there for you. And so you don't really need to do as much setup work, in between. And then for organizations, you can just kind of have your accounts for professionals and they can quickly add in new student profiles if they have new learners, remove them, and all works very nicely. So you can kind of just meet your caseload as it evolves.
Awesome.
I did also notice when I was kind of playing around is there is like the preset function, as you said. So you could assign a preset, skill set or session for said learner, or if you're running a certain skill, you're trying to like really lock down on a certain receptive ID, there's that preset for it. I also noticed there's another really cool function where you can shuffle those options so that it's not the same every time, but also to remove it. So let's say you are really trying to lock down on, let's say it's turtle.
Yeah.
You're really trying to lock down on turtle. You go through the whole list, you get turtle. All right, awesome. Next time you can start to shuffle, then kind of go back and forth.
Yeah.
So it's, from what I was able to see, it's very customizable. From each session, you could change the time to where it's locked. Of the other apps, you can change the array. I believe it's 2, 3, and 4.
We have up to 6 actually.
6. Okay.
So
okay.
you can do 1 to 6. Another cool feature that we have that I think is something that sort of speaks to the benefits of digital cards compared to physical cards is we have a difficulty setting, which is something that would almost be impossible to achieve with physical cards. The way that it works is it tailors the distractors to either be more similar or less similar to the correct answers. So on an easy lesson, we're going to pair, say we're doing safety signs, stop sign is going to be the correct answer, and then it's going to be the color blue, the color red, the color yellow, for instance. So in that case, you have lots of cues, that the stop sign is the kind of distinct and correct answer. And then you can scale that all the way up to a hard lesson where we're going to compare the stop sign with only other signs. So, the fact that it's a sign is not going to be enough. You need to know that it's red, it says stop, it's an octagon. And so having that kind of level of customization allows you to scale things up difficulty-wise in a couple different ways. So you can, increase the array, you can increase the difficulty level, you can increase the number of questions. So it's a really cool setup in that you can, kind of do things with cards or digitally that you couldn't really do with cards because, it would just be so difficult for you to
could,
be
but
pairing
it would just
all
take
that.
you forever.
It would take you forever. And as we've seen, the app is really quick. One thing which we're kind of really excited about is that, at least compared to my DTT skills for delivering, it's about 4 times faster than I am in terms of just kind of getting through those lessons. So there's no setup time in between trials. It's pretty much completely immediate. When you get the incorrect answer, we reshuffle the field for you, give you a little prompt. And so all these things, which would take some mechanical motion on your side, like you're taking those cards away and putting them back, that doesn't happen in the app. And that time does add up. It's one of those sort of similar to the lamination process, where it's something where, because it's business as usual, it's something that people don't think about very much. That's another component of DTT that I think is sometimes underthought about, where, especially with autistic learners, having them, sit down and work on something and pay attention to something that's non-preferred for an extended period of time is a really big ask. And so being able to reduce some of that extra downtime, where we're really asking them just to sit there, essentially, because, what's all that's happening is you're switching up the array for them. That can kind of move out, and it can be something where it's really quick and responsive, and it's just focusing on doing the learning, and then we can transition to reward. And there's not as much sort of incidental pause in the middle that doesn't really have much to do with the learning experience, other than that there's like some logistics that have to get sorted out by the professional.
And then before you know it, I feel like you turn your back, sometimes cards are flying.
Yep,
the
cards
kids
are
now
flying.
Yeah,
You're down the road.
Now, when you change the difficulty setting, and then you go to graph that session, or number of sessions, is there a separate graph for those, or does it compile it all as in the same? And then what is the way to differentiate which session was run as easy versus hard?
So we have a lot of filtering inside of the data. That's a kind of another cool thing with the application, where I think, as I see it, sometimes we have not as rich data as is possible to have when we're doing kind of manual collection. It's difficult to know, recording just whether or not it was correct or prompted or totally incorrect is a lot to remember for all the trials that you're doing. But starting to add in other features, like how difficult was that array, how quickly was the answer provided, and things like that, essentially impossible with physical cards. But the cool thing with digital systems is that that's just another point of data attached to that, kind of broader data point about that we identified the stop sign correctly today. So it's a really cool setup in that we can add essentially richness and layers to those data points, so that not only are we saying like, yes, this was right, no, this was wrong, we can also give a little bit more context there, so you can start to understand some moderators, like, maybe today all of the trials were answered at half the speed that they normally were, and so you could start to look to like, oh, maybe the learner was really tired today, or they forgot to eat lunch, or something like that happened, and it might have a little bit less to do with their kind of actual progress towards mastering these skills. So that's something that we're really excited about in the data, that, by kind of having more richness there, you can start to look at things that might have been hard to see just in the data, and would require having a kind of a conversation with the RBT, but it can sort of show up on its own almost sometimes.
Right. So essentially, by proxy, you're almost like making your own additional sets. So like set one is essentially like on easy mode, maybe no shuffle, and then as you kind of climb up, you're like, all right, set two is medium on shuffle, hard is maybe you're in set 4 or 5 already, and then by the end of that, we can clearly say, all right, the student has mastered the receptive ID of turtle.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to say I do love how much emphasis you put on data. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important, too, for everybody to understand your background, because from a behavior analyst standpoint, like obviously our bread and butter is the data, right?
Yeah.
Like, we don't know if what we're doing is working or not without data. So where does that come in for you? Like, when did you start having this want to create Firstwork as an app?
Yeah, so I got into ABA during COVID, actually, which I think was a really interesting time to see the field. I didn't get to see it before, so I can't speak to the transition, but it was a time where everything was kind of just different, and I think a lot of the really great things about ABA were made really obvious, and a lot of the things about the processes and systems that we were using were also made obvious, where this is not necessarily the best way that we could have done things.
When you say you got into ABA, what do you mean?
Sorry, I was working as
okay.
a technician there,
Okay.
so not a BCBA. But yeah, when I started working as a technician, I realized that we had all these really wonderful processes, things that were really replicable. Parents could do them, RBTs could be trained to do them, which means that there's something really kind of true and underlyingly important happening there. It's consistent. It has, the results that we want to see regularly. But I didn't see wonderful systems that kind of could help make those things more scalable, make it so that you could iterate on these things, and analyze, kind of the process itself, and start to kind of find ways to improve it. Kind of going back to that previous statement, it sort of felt like, a lot of the time we're recreating the wheel. So it's hard to go make a car if you're worried about, whether or not you have a round object that can roll around, which is what you need today. So what I noticed was that at the RBT level, there were just a lot of inefficiencies with a lot of the day-to-day things that we were doing, notably around the flashcard delivery process, where you were there was just a lot being asked of the technician. It's, you have to be understanding how DTT works and why we're doing it. We need to know the process of how exactly we should set these up and not be giving unfair hints or, kind of messing up the fidelity of the process. And then one thing which I thought was extra difficult was that you're supposed to track how things are going, but you're also supposed to be paying attention to the learner in front of you. And doing both of those things at the same time is actually really difficult. I took a cognitive psychology course once, and one of my favorite lines from that class was that there's no such thing as texting and driving. There's just texting or driving. So if you're in the car and texting, you're just texting. You're not driving anymore. And I think that the same can be said of most task switching, where you're either paying attention to the learner in front of you or you're recording data. And being able to just have that done automatically and sort of minimize some of the things that you need to think about was something that I felt was missing from the space, where we have all of these young people coming into the field and taking on a really difficult job where they have to learn a lot, like more than any other entry level job I know about. And this just felt like one of those things where it didn't need to be that way. We were one step away really from having a system where that extra needing to remember everything or take a break and kind of record data and then come back to the learner didn't need to happen. So just in general, I noticed that there was, these wonderful processes, but systems were not at that level. And so I'm passionate about systems and about data and about iteration and improvement. And so wanted to build something that would make it possible to start to kind of scale beyond that setup where everything was kind of happening organically kind of for the first time every time.
And I'm going to say it's not every day that a behavior tech leaves a session is like, I'm going to create an app. I'm sick of doing this crap. And I know it can be better. So do you have a background in technology at all? Did you go to school for it or?
Kind of. So my background is in behavioral neuroscience as an undergraduate. And then I went to school actually right down the road at the University of Pennsylvania for graduate school, where I was studying behavioral and decision sciences. And there we thought a lot about gamification and systems design. So not necessarily technology, but about ways to kind of scale things up and make systems out of processes. And I just couldn't stop thinking about my experience in ABA, where it felt like one of those spaces where there's incredibly important work happening, but the processes are good, but the systems are not. And so notably, the thing that really kind of had me thinking about this system the most was I was studying gamification, which is the process of creating a more rewarding and engaging experience by kind of adding game-like elements to existing experiences. And if you're familiar with the gamification literature, it's really interesting. The best kind of gamification happens at companies like Duolingo, and they're really focused on adult-based learning. And adults are interesting because we have, these kind of complex psychological profiles. Duolingo, for instance, really trades off of your motivation to be better than your friends, which is something that, really can bring an adult to
survival of the fittest. It's ingrained in us, right?
Yeah. So you see in adult systems, there are some psychological premises that, people can kind of leverage to get people to do the things that they wanted to do in the first place. But I didn't really see that with kids, except for in the gaming space, where techniques from the gambling industry are really common for gamification. So it felt like there was,
which has a slight unethical.
Oh, it's unethical for sure. It's if you
The premise is there,
Yes,
but the way it's implemented is
yeah.
maybe a little.
No, if you're a parent,
really
watch
watch
it. Look at the
line,
games.
yeah.
It's really scary stuff. The stuff that gets baked into these kids' games to get kids to buy in-app purchases and kind of stay on the application. So what I sort of noticed was that, despite the fact that we do actually know a lot about what motivates kids and, kind of how we can get them to engage in learning experiences, I wasn't seeing that kind of gamification happening. I was seeing a lot of sort of more negative and manipulative gamification happening for kids. And there was some great stuff that was happening for adults. So you can see that the, kind of prospect of building these sorts of systems to get people to help people do the things they wanted to do in the first place has all this promise, but in the kid space, it really wasn't happening. So
Do you have a hypothesis as to why it was so focused on adults and not kids until?
I think it's because there's scattered literature. So I similarly, when I was studying behavioral neuroscience, I never learned about ABA. And when
Interesting.
it's something where, and it felt I felt like I had been lied to almost when I went to ABA. I was like, so you're telling me that there's all this stuff that people actually know that actually works, and we've been talking about a 1% effect size, on some giant study, and so I think that there's an element of that where the type of literature and the type of understanding about how kids behave and how we can kind of motivate them and cause them to be more engaged is not super common. Like ABA is a sort of small field in that sense. And so I think there's not enough crosstalk, which
I
is
was going to
probably
say,
the
we've
main
talked
reason.
about that in the past, that a lot of people who find themselves in ABA accidentally stepped
Right.
into it.
Yep.
It's not ever intentional unless you're like, oh, my sister's a BCBA.
Yeah.
Or, oh, like, my best friend is an RBT. Like, that's really the only time that
usually
you come in
finds you,
contact
not
with
the
it.
other way around.
Exactly.
That's how I felt for sure. I graduated during COVID and I wanted to work in a lab. I had that neuroscience background, so that was kind of what was expected. And of course, all of the labs were closed, and so I was looking at. I was like, okay, well, let's think about behavior. That's something else I know about. And 2 weeks later, it felt like I was working
you
in
were
ABA.
sucked in, huh?
Yeah, it was just yeah. It was
Just to let the viewers know too, it was a lab of bees, correct?
It was a honeybee lab. Yes, I worked in a honeybee lab for a while doing honeybee behavior. One of the coolest roles I've ever been in. If you're a behavior nerd, I highly recommend you check out the literature. Honeybees are fascinating. They have democracy. They communicate with each other by dancing. There's all sorts of cool stuff happening in the honeybee world.
So you heard it here first. You can shape bees' behavior.
You can.
There you go. You heard it here.
You got to dance.
Yes, you got to waggle dance. That's what it's called.
A waggle dance.
The waggle dance. That's how they
did learn
communicate
about
with
that
each other.
recently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool stuff. They like directionally dance,
And they allow you to know where the
and they can
the
tell you
honey
where
is.
things are
Yeah.
based on that. Like how intensely you're dancing and where you're pointing.
How
It can
far
kind
away
of,
it is,
yeah,
like
they can-
distance-wise.
Yeah, that can mean like
Yeah.
1.5 miles over there. You know,
It's like a sonar dance. It's very strange, but they've mastered it, and we have not yet.
It's their own set of verbal behavior.
right?
And I know something we kind of talked about in a previous talk is due to the age of like AI that we're living in right now, the application that you have created doesn't mean to take away from the person.
Totally.
It's a tool to assist, but not to remove
Yeah.
the person from the entire experience.
Oh,
I actually
totally.
wanted to ask you your stand on that too, because like you had said, AI
Yeah.
is it's slowly creeping into the world
Yeah.
of ABA,
It's
and
very
it's meant
prevalent.
to assist.
Right.
But of course, there are going to be bumps in the road. So where do you stand on the fact that a lot of people have that argument of it becomes disingenuous, or you lose that rapport with the learner, or it could take jobs away from RBTs and BCBAs. So go ahead.
Yeah, there's no. I think it's a really interesting space. So I have a few thoughts about AI and ABA. The first one is I think that any effort to bring tech into this field really should be to assist professionals, assist parents, and assist learners. Professionals have so much rich context and do so much more than any application can do. In a vacuum, an app doesn't really mean anything if there's not a good plan, if there's not a good reason to be using it, if there's not good follow-up, there's not good understanding of what's happening inside of there. So I think that for Firstwork, and I think for all systems that can have a big impact in the space, it's really important to think of it as kind of a dyadic relationship between the professionals and the application, where they use the app, and the app really should not have or even try to have that kind of standalone impact that the professionals do. I think it's a bad plan, a bad idea, and won't work in the first place. So definitely think that that's really important to kind of understand what the professionals really are doing. And in my mind, a lot of that is really deeply understanding the context. And without that deep understanding of the context, we're not really going anywhere. So definitely think that that's super important to kind of have baked into any project in tech, especially AI. So for AI itself, I think that it's a really interesting time because ABA is one of those fields where there's more demand for services than there are people. So I think that because of that, AI stands to have no, yeah, right.
We've never heard.
Yeah, so I think that AI has the ability to make an outsized impact in this kind of space where their essentially efficiency solutions are what people are looking for. So if there was a way for one professional to have a bigger impact because they had technology that could allow them to do that, I think that's a great thing. And I think that that's probably the direction where AI will be able to go in the next, like 5 years or so for ABA, where, one professional will be able to have sort of a bigger reach, maybe a larger caseload. I'm not sure how it'll play out, but we'll be able to do more essentially with the same amount of time. So I think that is sort of the promise of AI and ABA, and also maybe make better decisions is sort of a secondary component. I think that the thing that's interesting about AI and ABA is that without better technology at the base level, I do have my doubts about the ability for AI to make that kind of impact. Traditionally, when you see AI making big impacts, it's in a space where there's tons of data, like just more, everything has already been mapped out and is easy for you to like kind of look at a bird's eye view. ABA is not that kind of space. Data is typically housed, because of HIPAA. It's not something that's sort of publicly available. And we're not really recording on systems like Firstwork yet. So because of that, it's just very difficult to kind of know what's been happening in the first place. And because of that, I think making plans based on that about what you should do as a result will sort of have the same skews that the data sets do. So that's the thing that I would be concerned about with AI initiatives right now, where without really high fidelity data that kind of speaks to the whole context, I think that any AI systems will probably represent the flaws in that data set more closely than they do kind of deliver the impact that they're looking to deliver. So it's not to say that it's a bad project. I think it's a meaningful project, but I do think that there are some logistical hurdles to AI having the impact that it could have in the future. So very interested to see how that will play out in the long run. But
for those who are listening, I just want to point out that AI stands for artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Sometimes I think we take for granted that everybody knows
That's for sure.
what certain things mean. It is artificial intelligence. Go ahead, Brandon, though. I was cutting you off. I'm sorry.
I forgot what I was going to say now.
Oh no, my God, bro.
They say if you forget what you were going to say, it wasn't important.
It's super
at all.
important. It was the most important. It's probably the most important thing I've ever said. Have you had any feedback or pushback in that realm where, you're promoting, you're on LinkedIn, you're on any social media, and someone, gives you the feedback, oh, I'm not going to use this with my child. I'm not going to assist in this, device because it's dehumanizing. Have you had or heard of feedback, and not just in Firstwork, but in any other like AI application so far?
So I think that with Firstwork, not a ton, admittedly. I think that a lot of the time, we are associated with ABA, so I think a lot of the kind of sentiments about ABA sometimes kind of affect the perceptions of Firstwork. And some folks do have those sort of criticisms about ABA. So I do see it in that realm sometimes. But I think that that's one of those concerns that is legitimate to really take seriously, because that's not what anybody should be trying to do, and we should really be working against all of that, very stridently. But at the same time, I think that given that we're not at a place where everybody has access to all the services they need and, are getting all the support that they need, I think a more open mindset towards technology could benefit people, just because if technology can make that impact, I think that's a great thing. So I do understand where those sentiments come from, that, what you really want is great folks like yourselves, working directly with a family and with kids and, kind of making that positive impact. And technology does kind of have that cold sort of feeling. So I totally understand why people want the primary impact to be coming from professionals. But I think that not, kind of considering other options because they're tech-based, could be a little bit limiting, especially given some of the really cool stuff that's happening in the space right now. There's, some great tools that people could benefit from. So I think having an open mind towards technology, can be something that can be great for the space.
Yeah. I think it's the fear of the unknown what gets
Totally.
people. And AI is, again, obviously new. I think something that is so important, though, is the person who's spearheading it.
Yeah.
So if you have strong ethics and, clear values that are outlined, and you stick to them regardless of what the environment throws at you, and you seem very conscious that you're constantly looking at data, you're seeing the impact that the app has on not only the learner themselves, but the field in general. And I think that is the most important thing, is if the person who is, overseeing it is able to say, like, hey, this is either going too far, we need to rework this because it is starting to toggle into that unethical area, or maybe disrupt the field in a way that's not beneficial.
Yeah, I think keeping those ethics front and center is really important, especially in AI, where these systems are big and powerful, and and then we're working with often vulnerable populations, so that's kind of an extra added component there. So our philosophy is measure a million times, cut once. We like to be really, really intentional with everything we do and roll out things that are robust and in good working order. And we talk a lot with professionals about kind of the things that we're building. So that sort of ethos has been really helpful to us. And I think that in general, it's something that will both help with your business, I think, as well as delivering, kind of the outcomes that you want to have. I think we see this a little bit even with companies like OpenAI, where the perception of the company has changed a lot since they've moved from a kind of for humanity sort of product to a for-profit product, and it's something that it has a big impact on people's perceptions and what the product will really do. And I would like to see more people taking taking the time to really think about what they're doing, because these are big systems that are going to really define a lot of people's experiences. And if you have something that's cold and unfeeling and unfair, or you're kind of inappropriately using people's data or things like that, there's just a whole host of problems that you introduce that nobody needs. It's not better for anybody. So I'm personally really bullish on the idea that you should measure a lot and cut once, and be really open to the idea that sometimes you might make mistakes, and if you do, you just got to walk that right back and kind of take it on the chin and not double down.
And I think that's the important part about remembering the person who's spearheading it or the human behind all that, because you can take the application, but it's not the end all be all.
Yeah.
I think the big fear that a lot of people have is like, oh, well, they're outshining me. They know more than me. I could tell you many times that I've used AI and the answers are wrong.
Oh, totally.
Or I've had to kind of walk it back or feed it more information
Again, to be
get
fair,
to that
it's
right
new.
answer.
And we're
Right.
shaping the technology, so
Right.
that's where, like you had said, it falls on the individual
you
to
used a key word
correct
that
it.
I think should be viewed or used more is it's a tool.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even use it as like this is the answer. This is a
Yeah.
tool that a human can use
Right.
to help shape behavior, to help shape the environment, to help shape whatever it may need to. But it's about the person who's kind of leading that.
Right. And I know you pointed that out earlier too, that it doesn't make the therapist or the clinician lose their process.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
So first and foremost, teach the process, teach the why, use that behavior skills training to ensure that they know how to run the program.
Yeah.
Make sure that it's a comprehensive program for the learner and it's an individualized program. And then you just use it as a tool in your toolbox.
Yeah. And I think that the language of tools is really helpful there, because if you have a tool that you're trying to accomplish something with it and it isn't having that effect, like you as the user of the tool have the ability to say like, I need something else and this isn't what's right. And so I think that as an ethos of kind of using technology in this space, that's kind of a really great guiding principle that your judgment ultimately should really trump what kind of what systems you have access to or what tools you have access to. If you feel like it's working really well and you're seeing the data and it's showing that's great. But if you're finding that there's some tension between the fit between the tool and the learner, or there's some contextual issue, the best thing to do is to use your professional judgment and kind of use the tool that makes the most sense. And I think that the best thing that we can do from a tech perspective is just provide lots of great tools so that there's more options to benefit from tools and get those efficiency benefits, and you don't sort of end up in a situation where all you've got is a hammer, so everything kind of looks like a nail. We want to have screwdrivers, we want to have all the good kind of tools, so that whatever kind of situation you're in, you have something for that, and you don't sort of feel like you need to do just one thing.
And I think it's important too, like you mentioned before, there's a lot of burnout in the field, but then thinking about, many of us are in schools and we see a lot of burnout from teachers, especially in,
100%.
The post-COVID landscape. And I think using this as a tool, even like during COVID, like you said, we had good ideas, but no systems. So
We were just throwing stuff at the wall to see what stuck.
yes. Or I had teachers who, you have a self-contained autism class. Virtual learning wasn't really conducive for anybody. Yeah. Like they're trying to do a whole song and dance for a morning meeting on Google Meet. And they would tell me, they're like, well, I know I wasn't supposed to, but I dropped off a bunch of materials at their house. So thinking about, if they had something like this, it would have made lives so much easier. And I think even going forward, it's one less thing teachers have to do.
Yeah.
And minimize that burnout or minimize teachers just leaving the field in general.
Yeah, I think we need to protect the people in this space. Like one thing I've been just feeling all the time, to speaking to people in this space is like, it's a really passionate and wonderful group of people. And I think that, creating an environment where people are able to make it a career and stay in the field and, have opportunities for advancement is just so good for the kids and the community. So I think it's a real shame when people feel like they need to leave the field for their own personal wellness. And it's very legitimate. We've all seen that it's a really hard job, and, whether you're working in a school or, in an ABA context, it's hard work. And, anything I think we can do to minimize that where it is possible, and I think that a lot of these process inefficiencies are a place where that's, kind of the easiest to do, will hopefully lead to a career and a job that's a little bit easier, because there's some parts of it that are not going to become any easier. Like there's an inherent difficulty in the work, and I think trying to minimize it to just that would be the best thing possible.
And something else we talked about previously too is using this as a tool, I think, could actually strengthen the relationship between the therapist, the RBT, the parent, whoever, because when the program is going wrong, it's the program's fault. It's not necessarily us delivering the work. So in those moments, we can almost kind of be like that guiding help to kind of come in and be like, all right, well, let's work this out. Let's go over it together. It's okay. We got a few wrong. Let's just try it again. But it's also the expectation is set on the device. Yeah. So it's you're setting an expectation. You're saying first work, then play.
Yep.
And it's not on us as much anymore. It's not like, oh, I hate Ms. Brianna because she makes me work all the time.
Oh, totally.
It's like, all right, we're just going to do Ms. Bree's center real quick, and then we're done.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a really helpful piece to remember about using that as a helpful tool. Is it takes away from the frustration that they have with us, because as you know, there are some learners in the field, some classrooms where that pent up frustration might be held throughout the day. Yeah. And then it kind of becomes more aversive for them to ever want to do the work.
Sure.
Because then it's not first work, it's never work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and one thing that's been really interesting that we've been hearing is sort of a different way that we've been seeing engagement being driven is kind of going back to that incidental setup work and just kind of all the things that professionals are doing in the background that take them away from paying attention to the learner. By minimizing that, we've heard some really exciting stories about, kids engaging with their professionals in a way that they hadn't before. We've heard about kids who had never done any labeling activities, and then they, use Firstwork, and they're like, oh, that's an elbow, and everyone's like, what? You knew about the elbow the whole time? So it is pretty cool where by being able to kind of strip out some of the things that you're doing in the background, you can kind of give 100% of your attention to that learner. And sometimes that can have a big impact. And, also, who doesn't like working on the tablet? Everybody's favorite thing is the tablet.
I was just going to say,
that
with that gamification, it's also as a clinician, like you can only be so robust and fun for so long before you start to not get burnt out, but like you get tapped for the day. You know what I mean? Like you're a human being. You're going to at some point start to lose your muster.
Yeah.
And then not be as engaging, right? So that's where the app comes in. And I think that's amazing, is because obviously kids are learning a lot of things from technology. Yeah. Sometimes they're not the best things, but they're constantly learning. Like I have friends who have kids, and then they'll tell me like they watch Coco Melon, and then all of a sudden they know how to point out their head, shoulders, knees, and toes. You know what I mean? So like they are learning. So giving them a platform to learn the right things in a contrived setting is amazing. Yeah. And not to switch gears, but I do have a question. So for the roadmap of Firstwork, where do you see it going? And then do you have any goals or aspirations moving forward for it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now we have a really best-in-class library of images for things like matching and receptive ID. And we want to kind of be able to utilize all that to work on a broader range of individualized learning targets. So things like an instructor-scored expressive module where you can work on expressive skills, and then the instructor can use that image, but then they can give the answer about, or kind of provide input on how correct that response was. Things like intraverbals, things like feature function class. So we have a lot of great content goals that will sort of expand the ability to use Firstwork for that sort of individualized learning in the DTT format, so that you can really work on almost any target inside of the application. So that's something that we're really focused on over the course of this summer. We're also building more customization settings always, which is a lot of fun. So kind of working on ways to make the app even more deeply customizable. And then we're also working on our AI systems as well to sort of start to tailor the experience so that we could provide insights about what settings seem to have been working really well, and sort of start to provide a little bit more prompting to the instructor user about what we've seen in the data and what they might be able to probe out and sort of try as a result of that. So moving in the direction of being able to provide more insights so that on top of having access to all that data, the data can also speak to you a little bit without you having to do some of that analysis work. So those are the things that we're really focused on right now.
Would you ever go into the realm of reinforcer preference assessments?
That's something that
because all the apps are housed on the iPad to see which apps are being utilized the most.
That's a great idea. And I think that one thing that we're really passionate about is focusing on reinforcement with the same type of rigor that people focus on instruction. And I think that that's something where, there's not many people doing that. And so I love that idea specifically. And I think it's, there's a lot that we can do in terms of kind of providing that rigor of analysis when it comes to your reinforcers and, kind of when you access them, how you access them, how much you access them, and how that impacts your behavior. And I think it's a unique platform to be able to kind of have all that right in front of you where, again, really difficult to do in person. But, with all this data and knowing exactly what you were doing and, when, you can start to really provide more insights based on that. So that's sort of one of the big goals we have for the product more generally is to be, kind of best in class when it comes to the reinforcement side of things, while also leveraging all the wonderful processes that are used in the instructional component. So we're not really trying to innovate on instruction. We're really trying to innovate on reinforcement.
And I think it helps that even when it comes down to the reinforcement, like typically in a normal session, you have a kid, he earns his iPad, and now timer goes off and it's up to the clinician.
Oh, yeah, you're the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it takes that away, which is very nice because then again, like it doesn't damage that relationship that we had talked about.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things we hear from parents a lot is they're like, oh, so you're saying that I don't have to be the bad guy, and because there is something, if you think about it and you kind of zoom out, like taking something away from somebody and then, sequestering it, which is often what you have to do. Like that's a pretty intense behavior. And, if that's happening every day, sometimes multiple times a day, and there's a strong reaction to it, that's not wonderful for your relationship. So
It also shapes a stronger contingency because how many times does the timer go off and then it doesn't get taken away right away?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like the delay is there.
Yeah, the delay
you know what
is
I mean?
there, yeah.
So if it's just shutting off all by itself,
yeah, you're kind of all done,
there's no other option.
Yeah.
So
Or you have, parents, teachers, whomever, they're like, I just can't take it away one more time. I'd
Yeah.
rather them have it because they're quiet.
Right.
I don't want to see that escalation in behaviors. And at times, too, if there's one teacher in that class and however many kids, maybe there's, one paraprofessional or someone else. But do you really
again,
have time
the
to do all
latency
that? Yeah.
between the time the
Oh,
timer
totally.
goes off and then the time the iPad actually gets taken away and turned off is much larger than you'd like it to be. So if it just turns off.
Yeah, and in the school setting, professionals have really enjoyed that you can do both, personalized instruction through the presets where you can figure out what lessons you should be working on, and then you can also do those tailored rewards, and you don't have to take it away. So it's really nice in kind of that sense where you can kind of accomplish a lot more as one person in terms of like personalization. It's just, talk about a job that's really difficult, dealing with 30 people's needs at the same time, or whatever the number is that's in your caseload. That's just a lot to manage, and it's basically impossible. So it's nice to kind of have the option to tailor both, the reinforcer and the lesson, and then not have to actually physically moderate the whole process as well.
And I know we keep using the word iPad. So is this an Apple exclusive app right now?
No, I use that colloquially. We do have Android as well. So we have Android and iOS at this point.
Just for anybody who's interested in possibly using it. That is a big
For all the
question.
Android winners out there.
And it's iPad specific or tablet specific, or can you use it on a smartphone as well?
Phones and tablets, yeah. Anything that isn't like super, super old. So like any, your personal phone or your
So if
tablet
your
you have at
iPhone
home.
has a home button, it's not working.
I think it might work on some with the home button, but if it was an iPhone 4, I think we might have some problems.
We have other things we need to discuss
Right.
at that point in time.
So you said that you are in the process of adding more to the receptive and the matching. Like, do you plan on adding more skills to kind of like that larger set of everything? Like, I believe you mentioned a feature function class, or is that all going to be compared into the like those two kind of categories?
We're definitely planning to add more. We call them modalities. So we have like counting and arithmetic, receptive matching, sound to letter sound, and
Flightless birds.
Flightless birds. And so we are planning to add a lot more, in terms of modalities. We've been getting a lot of interest in the application from, kind of a broader range of learners, some neurotypical learners, and then also learners who are a little bit older. So that's something that's a goal of ours, is to add just kind of more relevant learning content so that you can work on just about anything. One thing that's really cool with the discrete trial setup as well is that anything that's kind of traditionally memorization based, so like say geography or, your times tables, work really, really well with DTT, which is, in my opinion, basically the best in class for kind of, really rote memorization-based learning. Not that that's all that it's for, but, there's a lot of modalities that I think will be really exciting in the app. So we're working on some academic goals, kind of some functional and safety-related goals, and then kind of rounding out our ABAS curriculum that's kind of focused on the things that folks are traditionally doing with their flashcards.
Yeah. I love that. This is kind of like an off-topic question, and I think it's important for us to all understand we love what we do, but sometimes, you do step out. So when you're not completely developed into Firstwork, what are your other hobbies and what do you do?
That's a great question. Not much.
Just
24/7.
Yeah, just all I do is work. No, I'm just kidding. I like to run. I'm engaged, so I spend a lot of time with my fiance. We hang out at the park a lot. We're big hikers and walkers, so we like to get outside and camp and things like that. I have 2 dogs, so do all the dog stuff. And I like to play golf, so I like to get out there.
You're mentioning everything that it's a bunch of steps.
Yeah.
all you do is just walk around.
I walk around, I guess, is the answer. We've
It's a very active
Yeah,
couple, okay?
right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
The most active.
Before we wrap up, I'd like to just have everybody know where they could find your app. So where would they go to download it? How would they get in contact with you? Where's your website? Those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way to access the app itself is to search Firstwork. So that's Firstwork, Firstwork, one word, on either of the app stores. So the Google Play Store or the App Store would be the first thing that comes up. So if you want to find it there, do that. It is a freemium model, so it's easy to download. It's free to download. We have about 10% of our content and all of our features available to anybody. So if you wanted to try out the app, no commitments at all to understand how it works and try out some of the content, though all of the content is gated behind a subscription. So if you want to use it kind of robustly, there is a subscription component. If you wanted to learn more about the application itself, you can find a lot of information on our website at firstworkapp.com. So that's firstworkapp.com. And then I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you search me, Patrick Faga, on LinkedIn, feel free to connect. Would love to chat with you. That's kind of my main watering hole on the internet.
He responds in 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm quick.
Unless he's golfing or walking.
Yes, unless I'm golfing or
Actually,
walking.
while he's swinging, he's
Got a great one-handed
Yeah.
swing. Yeah, I've got a work-life balance, right?
Exactly. Well, Pat, thank you so much. I think there was so much invested in this. It's so important, and I can't wait to kind of catch up in a little bit and discuss what else is in the future for it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to be here and fantastic energy. So thank you all and for BDA for having me here.
Of course.